winds howl, the snow curls, and the deep mountain passes are filled with drifts of ice and snow. Crossing the mountains is always perilous, but here and now there comes another, more terrifying noise. Not the roar of a cave bear, nor the sound of hooves from a stampede of elk. No, this is the far more ominous thump, thump, thump of a creature taller than a house, striding towards them. Hello adventurers and welcome back to the Red Quills. My name is Ryan and today we are continuing on with the November map making challenge, the Red Quills Mapvember. And on this day, which is the 17th day of the challenge, we are going to break the waters on a race I have not yet done a video on this channel at all, which is an absolute shame because it's one of my favorites. We are going to be talking about giants. Now, before we dive straight into it, if you're watching this for the first time, if this is your introduction to the channel, first of all, welcome. It is wonderful to have you. Let me know if you like this video, if you are running giants for your campaigns. I'm going to talk a little bit more about creating some environments that are suited to their stat blocks and their lore. I'm going to give you some examples from my own campaigns. But if you want to know more about the challenge that I'm running, this month I'm coming out with a new video every single day, and we're making a collaborative community-led atlas, and I fully suggest you watch the actual video that I've got on it, which is linked above, or you check out the Red Quills Discord, which is linked in the description below. You can find all the downloads there, you can meet the other people being a part of it, and you can take on the daily challenges that we're sharing in that channel. So, back on topic. Much like dragons, giants are one of the cornerstones of the mythical creatures in Dungeons & Dragons. And despite the fact that they were excluded from being added to the name, giants have a very rich lore and history. And although the stat blocks are surprisingly bare for the amount of actual paragraphs they've got written on their cultures, there is so much that you can do with giants. In my own campaigns, which I've been running for several years now, giants always form a cornerstone because I love them. I think they're fantastic. I think they're really, really interesting, and they're wonderful to role play. From the brutish hill giants to the much more aloof and wise storm giants. And I brought them into my campaign a couple of years ago by introducing the Ordning as being a regular meeting between the various races of the giants. They would gather every year at the city called Agdu Sky, where they would talk about matters that concerned them as a population, as a race, beyond the petty squabbling of mortals. They would gather there to talk about wars with the dragons, to determine who is the strongest of each of the individual races, to issue challenges, and do all those other things. And my players went to one of the Ordnings and they challenged the guy in charge, the storm giant Ul, and they had a climactic battle, and they won the respect of the various other races by having flighting competitions and dealing diplomatically between the different races, issuing challenges, bringing back trophies. And they had such a great time that I really want to add it to this world as well, because I love giants, guys. I love it. So what we're going to do today is we are going to design the Mountmoot, a mountain filled with caverns designed specifically to house the various races of the giants. And if you want to create an environment suited to them, if you want to talk a little bit more about the lore, if you want to explore some in your own worlds, then absolutely get out a piece of paper and your best Fineliner pens, and we're going to sit down and design this mountain. So first things first, I'm going to get out an A3 sheet of paper. Normally these layers are done on A4, but because they are larger than life, so is our map. And I'm going to add a few decorative little additions to this as well. So first things first, I'm going to get out the acrylic pens in purple. That's going to be my thematic color for this map. And I'm going to do some rune work on the borders as well. Now that's not strictly necessary for your own maps, but it does add a fun little decorative aspect to it. What we're going to do after we've done our little border is I'm going to go through and design several layers to this mountain. What I want us to picture is a large peak standing amidst a mountain range, the top of it sheared off by some monumental force in ages hence to create the moot of the Ordning, where they actually gather a large amphitheater with several large columns upon which are carved the history of the giant races. That's where they gather to talk about the issues that are most important, where they decide who presides over the Ordning, where they issue challenges between the races, and where they resolve disputes between races as a whole. It's also where they discuss the future and the prophecies that are being handed down by the storm giants. So we're going to start there. That's on the cliff face. And what we're going to do as we go down through the mountain is we're going to move backwards down the ordning. So the moot is at the top. There are several chambers that are for the use of all of the races. But then we've got chambers for the storm giants, the cloud giants, the frost giants, the fire giants, the hill giants, and finally the door, the gate to the moot, is guarded by the stone giants. So it's slightly out of order because the stone giants are down at the bottom, but it works out in the end as being really fun. Let's start at the bottom at the guard where the stone giants are. The reason I've got the stone giants at the bottom is they're known as being fairly good, fairly gentle, and fairly introspective, and they can be trusted to guard the gate, whereas several of the other less powerful races like the hill giants, the fire giants, and the frost giants really cannot be trusted to do that. They're all fairly selfish or unintelligent individuals, and so the stone giants take it upon themselves to guard the gate. Now, because they accept their roles as the guard of the Mountmoot, that makes the guard itself either a puzzle or an NPC interaction for the players, because what we have to do is design the mountain not just to be an environment which makes sense to the giants, but also to be an area that is navigable by the players, and that provides them with those 5 cornerstones of any dungeon crawl, which is ambience or choice, puzzles, traps, combat, and finally climax or boss battles. And so as we go through, I'm going to characterize each of the different areas as being a place that is suited to some kind of giant or have a different kind of challenge. The gate is the first, and it is an NPC interaction or a puzzle. Now, the stone giants have accepted their roles as being the guards of the gate at the moot because they can be trusted more than the other lower levels of giants like the hill giants who are too stupid for it, or the fire giants or frost giants who are a little bit too selfish to be trusted with that kind of monumental task. Now, the stone giants are introspective and patient, so they can be dealt with by a group who is willing to negotiate or compromise with them, because they do take their roles of guards to the ordning seriously. So if a mortal comes to the gate and doesn't have a very good reason to be let through, then they won't allow them to be let through. But players could also try to get in unseen by the stone giants, in which case not only is that a stealth challenge, but they have to figure out how to open and close those doors to the ordning. Great sheets of hinged stone designed by the fire giants that weigh at least a ton each without being caught and without making any sound. Now, if they do manage to get past the gate, they enter into the first area, which is the Cavern of the Hill Giant. Because the hill giants are naturally brutish and lower intelligence and impatient creatures, what we're looking at here is much less refined than the upper parts of the ordning. They have a large grass-covered cavern with piles of bone strewn hither and thither around. A campfire is based off to one side, more of a bonfire to creatures of medium stature, and elsewhere throughout the cavern are dotted the entertainment and the games of the hill giants. Boulder tossing competitions, mud pits, and other such exciting environments. So this provides them with a tactical combat or with a stealth opportunity. Either they get through without the hill giants seeing them, or they cause a distraction using one of the games to draw the hill giants' attention away from any interlopers, or they fight the hill giants, in which case they not only need to fight the giants in a way that means that the other giants aren't going to attack them on sight, because killing giants within the Mountmoot is a terrible idea, so they'll just need to disable them or knock them out. But they will need to do so in a way that means that the environment cannot be used to their effect. And in previous videos, I've talked about how you can use muddy pools to create difficult terrain or hiding places for large creatures. You can play with the temperature to make it give cold or fire damage. You could have the hill giants being able to pick up the boulders and throw them as a team so that you increase the damage dealt and change it from a 2-hit to a dexterity save for the players. Because once they move past the hill giants cavern, we're going to get to the fire giants, because we're moving in the order of the ordning. And the fire giants, of course, is an immediate hostile environment. Every minute spent within the heat of the forges gives the players a point of exhaustion. Now, the fire giants are, of course, immune to fire damage, and more than that, are inherently cruel, but their area is filled with all of their inventions and their forges. They're going to have created armor and weapons for the rest of the giants, and everywhere is going to be strewn with their previous inventions and innovations. So it's going to be as much of a stealth challenge as it is a hostile environment. Fighting one of the fire giants here without the benefit of cold spells or the ability to stave off the heat is tantamount to suicide. Then we move past and we get into the caverns of the frost giants. And once again, hostile, but on the far side of that scale. Instead of exhaustion, you're just taking cold damage here. And they have several smaller caverns here, while the fire giants and the hill giants had one large cavern that had obstacles within it. This is the first part of the Mountmoot that has a central cavern and then offshoots to it. So the central cavern is where they keep their trophies and their memories. They are cruel migratory creatures, and so they've brought back here the various artifacts that were proof of their conquest of other races. Another fun thing to do in this cavern, as well as giving cold damage, is to lower concentration or dexterity abilities here, as cold does to us in real life. So make it more difficult for wizards to hold onto spells or for archers to loose their weapons. And once again, we're using the environment in a way that makes sense for the giant who lives there, because of course they are immune to cold damage. But also looking at the stat blocks that you have for the giants, you may notice that several of the simpler giants, like the hill giants and the fire giants and the frost giants, they don't have all that much in terms of bells and whistles, in terms of the abilities. What we're going to be relying on then to make them interesting is an environment in which they can interact with the temperature in such a way that it turns into a weapon, as well as being perfectly suited to their lore and abilities. So moving on from the frost giants, we get to the Lesser Moot, and this, what I've designed it for, because the ordning is the opportunity for each of the individual races to determine their relative strength to one another, this is for the challenges amongst the lesser tiers of giants. So if there are challenges between stone giants or fire giants, between frost giants and hill giants, they take place here. And this is the opportunity for the players to directly challenge the giants. Before, they were trying to get by unnoticed, or they were interloping within a certain area, but here is the opportunity for them to stand up and directly interact with the traditions and the lore of the giants. They can't be attacked illegally if they have requested a specific challenge. If they succeed in that challenge, the giant lore of the Mountmoot means that they will be treated as being stronger than whomever they have challenged. So therefore treated with a modicum of respect. Past the Lesser Moot are the wind chambers, the halls of the cloud giants. Now, according to the lore, cloud giants are naturally very tricky creatures. Like the wind itself, very transient and changeable. They like their jokes and humors, and they're constantly trying to trick people or tell riddles or figure out some kind of corkscrew thinking to worm their way around the expectations everyone has of them. And so we want to play with that. So I'm going to add a little bit of lore and have a collapsed hall, which gives some context to the fact that once upon a time, long ago, they tried to usurp the power that the storm giants had as being the premier level of giant power by trickery. And the storm giants were so angry that they collapsed the hall that once held, most of their prized possessions. But the cloud hall and the wind chambers showcase a little bit more of the cloud giants' abilities. Because unlike several of the lower tiers of giants, these giants can use several spells, like detect magic, like fog cloud, like gaseous form. So the ability to use magic also works quite well if there is a buffeting wind. Now, wind already has some effects, like makes it more difficult to maintain concentration. You need to make saves against being knocked prone or being pushed back. And those kinds of effects in this environment really work well with spells that deal with the weather, with gaseous form, with Misty Step or telekinesis. They're going to try to use trickery and images to throw people off. So clouds that form within this chamber or winds that push people around are lair actions that you should definitely consider. Then we move on, of course, to the Halls of Uvar, the storm giant halls. I've had a little bit of lore here myself. In my own world that I created in the Atlas of Endon, I discussed how the giants have like a long history of magic. They were one of the precursors to modern magic with their rune magic, and they developed a kind of tree called the Leiptres. Now the Leiptres is a kind of bronze tree made out of a special metal that attracts lightning, like a natural lightning rod. And they use those to create several of their artifacts, and the fire giants use them to forge their weapons. And so what I did here was I added a hall in which a few of these trees grow and they gather lightning from inside the mountain itself, which in and of itself not only gives a lot of lore for the players to learn about, but creates a hostile environment. Because of all the levels of the giant, they should be most afraid of the storm giants, but they have the best chance of negotiating or getting what they want from the storm giants. But here, again, we've got a lot of lore. So there's a hall of deeds in which all of their previous accomplishments have been carved upon the walls. They've got vaults where they keep the treasures of the giants, and they've got the Hall of Leiptres themselves. Because then finally we move out into what we'll call the administrative halls, which is a very boring name for what is a very boisterous way of living. So we've got brawling chambers, feasting halls, flighting halls, and all of these form a different kind of challenge, whether it's, fighting and combat, whether it is, NPC interaction, whether it's some kind of charisma challenge. We've got halls that have lore about their history and prophecies, so the past and the future both here. And we've got petitions where you go to specifically ask giants to help you put an issue forward to the Mountmoot. And then after all of that, we've got other halls that were built for guests. So in the history of this, I have made it so that long ago, the dragons and the giants had a war. And in that war, they carved out this fortress in the Mountmoot, not only as a place to gather and discuss strategy, but also as a final fortress if the war ever got that far. And so they carved out several chambers for guests, specifically to house some of the godlings that were popping up across the world in response to this magical conflict. And between all of them, you have the basis for an adventure in which you can have the players be required to gain the allegiance of the Mountmoot. In order to do that, they not only need to oppress each of the races of giants in a special way, suited towards their lore, for instance, beating the hill giants in a brawling fight, or competing with the fire giants in a test of ingenuity, outsmarting the cloud giants with a trick, or dealing with justice and order with the stone and storm giants. It allows you to create an outline which leads them through it step by step by step. So by the time they finally get to the ordning, the boss battle itself is a challenge which incorporates each of those parts, where they have to fight someone for the challenge and the right to speak to the ordning, where they must then speak eloquently and appeal to each of the races of the giants individually, where they appreciate the lore and history and future of the giants, and they understand the context in which they are speaking. So once again, thank you for joining me for this particular adventure. I really appreciate you watching me. If you've enjoyed this, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and you like what I've been talking about. Comment below to let me know how you've used giants in your own campaign. I would love to hear what you did for them, whether it was a one-off or whether you had fortresses like I do, or whether you had cities of the giants like I've got in my other world, Agdu Sky and Agdu Ild. And I'm going to finish up by giving you the challenge for tomorrow. So today is day 17, tomorrow is day 18, and what I want to do is I am going to challenge myself and make another Wizard's Tower. So previously on the Really Quick Map series, I made an Evoker's Tower, the Tower of a Wizard of Evocation, and there's just so much to say about each of the individual schools that I wanted to make one for each of them. So I'm going to come back to the Wizards and I'm going to make the tower for an Illusionist. I personally think that the illusion class is the most powerful of all of them, despite the fact that weird is a waste of a 9th level spell slot. And what I want to do is design a tower that is created with the intention of making the players doubt everything. How are you going to do that if you create your own? I'm going to show you mine tomorrow. So we're going to create the Tower of Mist, which is the home of a Wizard of the Illusion School. What spells are you going to use? How are you going to set them up? And what's the design of the lair going to look like? So I will see you tomorrow for that episode. Thank you for joining me for 17 straight days so far. And I hope to see you for the 18th. And until then, happy mapping. Winds howl. No, hang on. Winds howl. Birds of prey squawk high in the mountain peaks. The wind No, wait. Yes.